And what is up? Welcome in. Wes Mitchell here, Chris Clark, GC Live Thursday episode of the show. This is what we like to call the opponent's view. This will be the Texas A&M view of South Carolina versus Texas A&M. Of course, this Saturday, 7:30 p.m. SEC Network, Williams-Brice Stadium. Going to be joined here shortly by Tim Verghese from Aggie Scoop. That is the Texas A&M On3 site. Chris, what's up, man? We're rolling along. Texas A&M and the Gamecocks right around the corner.
There's a lot of anticipation and excitement for this game, man. You can kind of feel it. I feel like the layoff between Kentucky and now has only amplified how excited people are about this game. Just from some things we've heard, I know Shane Beamer mentioned that tickets have been harder to come by. It really does seem that way. I mean, I've seen tickets that have been going for sale, like on the Insider's Ticket Exchange on Gamecock Central, getting snapped up a lot faster than you normally see. Just some things I'm hearing talking to Gamecock fans and friends and family. Tickets definitely harder to come by in this one. So haven't announced the sellout yet. You'd have to think it'll get there, but a lot of excitement around this one. Should be a really good recruiting visitor list. And should be a really fun game on Saturday night as well. So looking forward to diving into more of this matchup.
Yeah, shout out to all of our folks out there, all of our supporters who are already in the chat. See y'all getting in. Appreciate you joining us as always. And appreciate our buddy Clint Hammond. He is the presenting sponsor of our show here each and every day on GC Live. You can give Clint a shout if you're in the market for a new home. Yeah, interest rates are up. There's no way around that. But that also means competition for houses is down. So there is a give and take to everything, I think, right now. So if you just want more information about what might be out there, what options you may have, whether this really is a bad time to buy a house or whether it's an opportunity to buy a house, Clint can walk you through all of that. His NMLS number is 71597. Shoot him an email, chammond@mortgagenetwork.com, or you can just give him a call. I'm sure he'll talk some Gamecock football with you while you're at it. 803-771-6933. Yeah, dude, I think you got to imagine, man, that this thing's going to sell out. The trend for these has kind of been Friday announcement. I feel like Friday announced sellout. I think it's got to be headed that way. You can just sort of tell, there was a couple of games where I didn't know if it was going to get there, to be honest. And you look at this game, just the vibe I get from being around town, talking to friends of mine that are fans, people that are looking for tickets. It feels like one of those opportunities. And I would say, Chris, opportunity in that this is a fairly beatable A&M team. Not saying South Carolina should be favored. I don't think they should be, but it is a beatable A&M team. An opportunity, like you said, a bunch of recruits on hand. And it kind of, to me, Chris, feels like, I don't know, maybe the Kentucky game last year where it was a night game. It was a team coming in you knew was sort of ahead of South Carolina a bit in the pecking order at the time, but you felt like it'd probably be a tight game. And it feels like so many of those opportunities that Carolina could just never cash in on during the Muschamp era. Do you remember how many times the fan base got reeled back in and was kind of like, all right, guys, take a step. Let's do this. And it ended in disappointment. Shoot, man, you can go back to a previous Kentucky game at home. South Carolina rolls in. I believe that was fresh off of beating Missouri on the road, if I'm remembering correctly. So not last year, but 2 years prior to that. And Kentucky comes in and South Carolina scores on I think first or second offensive play of the day, Deebo Samuel, and then it was just downhill from there. So I think it just feels like one of those chances to take a step forward, if you ask me.
Yeah, it would be really nice to string together more of those positive moments. I remember, Wes, that Luke Day, the head strength and conditioning coach, did an interview with Gamecock Central right in the preseason, and he was kind of recapping summer workouts and talking about the preseason. And one thing that he pointed out was this team last season, they had a lot of really high moments and a lot of really low moments. And so certainly you can easily think back to last season and pick those out. Your high moments would be the Auburn game, the Florida game. Your low moments would be games like Clemson, Tennessee, A&M, right? And for the past 3 years, really the past 8, but if we're going to talk about how it's happened, the past 3 years really have been particularly painful. And I'd say the past 2 even more so. I mean, you had the stat earlier today. You blink, and it's a combined 41-0 in those 2 games before South Carolina can really do anything. It's kind of just over. You just have no chance. And so something that Luke Day talked about, to get back to his comments, was this season we're trying to stack more of those good moments on top of each other. And so this is really, I think, the best opportunity so far this season for South Carolina to do that, because it's back-to-back conference games. It's back-to-back games in which you can win. You're not favored. You weren't favored to win at Kentucky. You're not favored to win this game, but you can go and take that step and make a statement by winning the game. And I think that was a really good, that Kentucky game, and I guess that was 2017, right? Would have been it. That game, it does feel very similar. People are going to be very hyped up. South Carolina actually started fast in that game on offense and defense, just couldn't get it done. You look at last year's Kentucky game, they gift you some turnovers, you can't score, right? You would hope that South Carolina is better equipped this year, but we're going to find out on Saturday.
Yeah, and by the way, to make the stat even worse, Chris, not combined 41, literally 41-0 each game.
Oh, each game. There you go.
Before South Carolina
I was
scored.
wondering, I was like, wow, my math, that made it seem better.
Yeah, so it was 41. It actually was 44-0 last year before South Carolina scored. And the previous year, it was 41. South Carolina kicked that late field goal at home that the 10 people that were left booed, I think. And then I think A&M scored a late touchdown. But anyway, We're going to bring in our guest now. Tim, coming on GC Live here from Aggie Scoop. Tim, we appreciate the time, man. How are you doing today?
Of course. How are y'all?
We're good, man. Just getting everybody ready for this game. And I'm just going to go ahead and ask you so that I don't say it wrong. Go ahead. Say your last name for everybody so that I'm saying it correctly for the rest of the show, okay?
Sweet. Yeah, it's Verghese.
Verghese. Okay, I think I got it right in the open. Again, man, we appreciate you taking the time. This is a matchup, as we've been talking about, that South Carolina has really struggled in. The last couple of years particularly have not really been that close. It feels like this is maybe Carolina's best chance to at least compete in this game in a number of years. But I guess just off top, if people have not been paying attention to Texas A&M, they don't know much about this team. What are maybe the first couple of things that they need to know about South Carolina's opponent this week?
Yeah. I think with A&M, I think this is, like you said, I think this is South Carolina's best shot. I think this will probably be the closest game these two teams have played since Jimbo Fisher's been here. This A&M team entered the season with a lot of expectations. People close to the program felt like even 10-2 would be, anything worse than 10-2 would be a disaster. And they're already sitting at 3-3. It's been a weird year, and it's been a year where there's a lot of questions. I mean, even going into this game, there's a lot of questions on health. There's a lot of questions on who's going to play. There's a lot of questions on personnel. The offense has just been the same old Jimbo Fisher offense we've seen over the years. And it's really struggled at times. Quarterback play hasn't necessarily been consistent. Injuries haven't helped that at all. They have the weapons for maybe the first time since Jimbo Fisher's been here at running back and wide receiver to really get an offense going, and it's been hit or miss depending on the week. Defensively, it's a very stout secondary. I like to watch a lot of college football, see a lot of college football. I think A&M has one of the better secondaries overall in the country. They have a very young defensive line. Obviously, everyone remembers that 2022 signing class they had that had 8 defensive linemen in it, including some of the top, I think, 5 of the top 6 or 4 of the top 6 defensive linemen in the country. So it's a very young defensive line. They kind of came into their own a little bit against Bama. There's been some scheme stuff there. I think linebacker is the biggest weakness on defense, even though they do have, a future pro in Edgerrin Cooper. I think he's someone that is going to generate some draft buzz here in April or so. But No, it's an interesting team. It's an interesting year, and yeah, I think this game's probably going to be closer than most people expect.
Tim, I want to go to exactly what you said at the beginning there. You mentioned how there are a lot of questions from an injury standpoint and a personnel standpoint. Now, I watched Jimbo Fisher's Monday press conference. He did address Haynes King. He didn't really address a lot of the injuries. I know there have been a lot of rumors about either quarterback, offensive line, other spots. As best as you possibly can you give us a rundown of which guys, are up in the air for this game, or just how the team could be affected from an injury or personnel standpoint on Saturday?
Yeah, I guess it would have to be best because it is A&M is one of those programs that doesn't really give you the injury updates every week. They like to keep that pretty private. I guess we'll start at quarterback. Haynes did get banged up late in that loss to Bama. Had the bye week to recover. It's still not certain if he's going to play or not. If he doesn't, it's going to be Connor Weigman. Almost regardless, it kind of feels like things are trending towards Wigman playing. He's the freshman 5-star from Cypress Bridgeland when he signed on National Signing Day. Jimbo Fisher hailed him as the future of the program. And he's a very talented quarterback, and he has the type of talent and composure that can get the most out of this offense. It's just kind of Jimbo's very strict about making sure you learn the offense, making sure you do this thing before you can play. So we'll see. I think there's a decent chance we see Wigman in this game, regardless of Haynes' health. But if Haynes is healthy, Haynes is going to be the starter. So that's obviously quarterback. Running back, it's going to be a chain. I don't think there's any questions there. The offensive line, I think, is where the biggest injury concerns are right now. The entire left side of the line was completely messed around for the Alabama game. They had Trey Zune, who's their starting left tackle. He was out. So they moved Aki Ogunbi, who plays guard for them, out. And then they just moved and they rotated between, a couple guys at that left guard spot. There's no update on Zune. It sounds like there's a chance he doesn't play. Center Bryce Foster's had an up and down year, missed some time early in the year with mono, and then had a really rough performance against Arkansas and Mississippi State. Kind of bounced back a bit against Bama, but there are some injury concerns. He went down late as well. And there's a decent amount of rumors flying around that he might be out for some time. So I think you're going to see a lot of holes across the offensive line. This is a unit that's not exactly been very good this year already. And it's sounding like we're looking at a line that's going to be very young, and a line that someone like Zach Pickens or Jordan Burch can take full advantage of and cause some problems for this offense.
Tim, I know this is a loaded question because we get asked it all the time here. What's wrong with South Carolina's offense? Where do the problems stem from? And maybe at A&M, a lot of it does have to do with that offensive line. Obviously, if you don't have O-line play, it makes it difficult on everybody else. But it just in your opinion, what has been the biggest issue? Is it just maybe Jimbo, kind of running the same old offense, it seems like from the outside looking in that we've seen for so long? Is it O-line play? Is it QB play? Is it all the above? What do you think, man?
A bit of all of the above. I touched on it on Aggie Scoop the last couple weeks, kind of just addressing the offensive concerns and why. Like I've had this conversation with people, people in the league, people I know in the league, other people that watch this offense, and to me, I think the number one issue, you can point to individual play, you can point to individual units and be like, hey, that's an issue this game, that's an issue this game. At the end of the day, the biggest issue here is the scheme. You see teams with less talent have more offensive success with worse play at these offensive line, at these other things. It's just the way Jimbo Fisher's scheme is played. He hypes us up and talks about it as a very complicated scheme and why young guys don't really get a whole lot of opportunity to play. It's not necessarily complicated. I mean, if you look at it from the outside looking in, it's a pretty simple scheme. It's just it requires all 11 players playing absolutely perfect football every single snap for it to work at its best. And you're just not going to get that. It's just unreasonable to expect, especially with as many young guys are playing, and just in general. I mean, it's the SEC. You're not going to get 11 guys executing consistently against some of the best players in the country every single week. I think the scheme is the biggest issue. There's a good amount of buzz that I think a change is finally going to be made on offense this year or this offseason. And in my opinion, I don't think it's even that big of a change. Like, you're seeing the way the game is trending in the pros, even the way like South Carolina, Kentucky, some of these teams run offenses. No one's looking for the spread system, just throw it all over the yard system. They just want like just make it harder on defenses. Like A&M, you can count on your fingers the amount of times they've used motion this year. The amount of times they've had puller. Like it's a lot of simple. Their run schemes are very simple. Some of Devon Chain's biggest runs have come on the exact same guard halfback counter. It's the same thing. And I think when you look and you kind of look at this team, it's just you just got to get an analyst in there. You just got to get someone from whether it's a McVay tree, um, whether it's a true offensive coordinator. You just got to get someone in there to kind of just spice things up, get another voice in the room. And honestly, even for Jimbo himself, I think at this point of his career, it's probably better if he could just be a head coach instead of having to call the plays and then also having to deal with developing the quarterbacks or developing the wide receivers and yelling at the defense or whatever. He's every single play you watch him on the sideline. He's the busiest man, on in that stadium every single week because he's got like a massive sheet of papers he's ruffling through, and then in between plays he's going and yelling at guys or talking to guys no matter what side of the ball they're on. And he's just at this point in his career just hand it off to somebody else, like just for everyone's sake, honestly.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The play sheets for Jimbo, it stresses me out every time I watch it because a lot of guys have like the Waffle House menu or you have like a booklet or something, but his is like literally a stack of papers. They're all like stacked up. If I had those, they'd be so crumpled. I don't know. It stresses me out every time. But anyway, let me go to defense with you, Tim. Points we think will probably be more of a premium at a premium in this game. Something Jimbo touched on Monday and something we saw, kind of diving into A&M's games and the statistics, a little bit feast or famine on defense. Some of the statistics kind of are like a paradox. They've done some really good things. They've done some not so good things. But what has caused this defense the most problems? Is it the run game? Have they given up explosives? Kind of break that down for us.
They've surprisingly, I don't even know if it's surprisingly, they've been pretty good about limiting explosives. Really, it's the run game. You saw through the first couple weeks of the season, the first pretty much before the Arkansas game, the defense was primarily running out of this 4-2-5 front that they ran last year and that everyone had talked about. But there was, in certain situations, Durkin was bringing in, he ran it at Ole Miss last year, basically this 3-3 or 3-2-6 front, where you got two linebackers, 6 DBs, and 3 up front linemen. And the 3-2-6 has not worked that well. I understand the process, and I've reiterated it to A&M fans on our board and just on Twitter and stuff. I understand the process behind Durkin deciding to use that, especially, he used it against Arkansas pretty much the entire game and Mississippi State the entire game, and A&M just got, drilled on the ground. Um, but I understand the process. You want to keep those offenses from getting deep on you. But I think against South Carolina, I think moving forward, you're going to see more of that 4-2-5 front. They used it against Bama, had their best day rushing the passer, created some turnovers against, a backup quarterback for sure, but still like, a 4-star quarterback who's playing in a very talented offense. They created some turnovers, were able to create some pressure, cause problems for the offense. But no, I mean, as far as this team and their biggest struggles, it's going to be the run game, no matter the front. Um, like I said, their best units is secondary, and this run game would be so much worse if Damani Richardson, Antonio Johnson, and Jordan Gilbert weren't back there. Those guys are really good run defenders, but it literally takes like, you see it every game. There's a runner that breaks loose and gets through to the third level, and it's one of those 3 guys bringing them down. Like they've got very good run defenders in the secondary, but the front is still, like I said, young. The linebackers aren't, it's Edgerrin Cooper and a rotating cast of bodies next to him. So they haven't been able to fit the run all that well. So this could be a big game for South Carolina on the ground. I think tight ends and another thing that have caused A&M some problems this year. This could be a big, potentially even a breakout game for a guy like Jaheim Bell. So I'm interested to see how things play out. I think A&M shouldn't really have an issue with South Carolina through the air, just given the way Spencer Rattler's played this year, and also just how stout the secondary is. Um, they've got some injuries back there too, but they're pretty deep and pretty talented. So, injuries aren't as big of a concern in the secondary as they are, on the offensive side of the ball.
It is kind of a weird stat. We were looking today. A&M is I think second to last in the conference in rushing yards allowed per game. But then you look, they've only given up 3 rushing touchdowns this year. So is that just a statistical anomaly, or have they been good in general at keeping teams out of the end zones that are giving up yards in between the 20s? Or is there anything you can maybe account for that?
Yeah, it's sort of a bit of an anomaly, but also they've been one of those true bend don't break defenses this year.
Mhm.
They play a completely different brand of football once a team crosses their 30-yard line. They let teams make it all the way. You saw it. Remembering off the top of my head, I believe there's the Arkansas game and even the Bama game. You saw teams pretty much make it to the 50, opposing 40, and just kind of stall out there. They something clicks mid-drive, something clicks, once they get into the red zone, and they're able to lock things. Obviously, that shorter field helps, especially when you have those DBs flying around back there.
Mhm.
So that's been part of it for sure. But no, they've been very good in preventing points. And again, with as bad as this offense is, or has as many struggles as this offense has had at times, it's the defense has very much kept them in games, and even won them some games at times.
Tim, last one I got for you, man. Something that these offenses, South Carolina and A&M, have both struggled with is turnover margin. I think that's probably going to be a key part of this game. A, do you agree? B, what have you seen from A&M when they have struggled? I know they won the turnover margin against Bama. It's a big reason they were in that game, but lost it against App State, lost it against Mississippi State. What have you seen there, and how can they improve that?
Yeah. Man, it's really so Haynes King, if you watch him through all of it, he's not played a whole lot of football. He's in year 3 now, but he hasn't played a whole lot of football because of injuries and different things. And but even against Mississippi State, both his interceptions weren't necessarily on him. It was late in the game. He was subbed in late. One bounced off the hand of Evan Stewart right into a defender for a pick six. The other one was right there. It was a perfectly fine ball. Just kind of went through the receiver's hands and into the DB's hands. So it's going to be, if it's Haynes, it's just he's a guy that takes risks. I think Fisher kind of realized that, and you saw that against Bama. When King was originally benched for Johnson, A&M's offense started to move the ball a little more consistently, but they weren't creating explosive plays, and they weren't really getting downfield. And that's because Max is more of a conservative quarterback, and you look at Haynes. Haynes takes shots. You saw it against the Bama game. There's some throws in there that you're like, no, 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 no. And then, the receiver on the other end makes the play. You saw multiple times with Evan, Chris Marshall, all those guys in that game. So this game is going to be a lot of hey, and obviously, I think South Carolina, I like some of the DBs on South Carolina's team. I like that unit overall. Can he keep the ball clean, and can he take risks without really harming the team? You know what I mean? There has to be that balance there. That's going to be the big thing. Devon Chains had a fumble this year, but that's it's one of those it's not something that's normal for him. I'm not expecting him to have a fumble issue the rest of the year. But outside of that, it's really going to come down to quarterback play as far as turnovers go.
Yeah, Tim, that's a final thing I got as well. What's your feel on the flow of this game? I always try to get a feel, not even necessarily who's going to win, but just how this thing's going to kind of play out. Obviously, you can't predict, big weird plays like a pick six, or, if somebody turns it over 3 or 4 times, but it feels kind of like South Carolina Kentucky game a couple of weeks ago. You knew going in it was probably going to be fairly low scoring. It seems like both teams are probably going to have some success running the football. Maybe comes down to who scores in the red zone, who doesn't turn the football over. That's just my opinion, though. What's your feel on how this thing could play out as far as how many points it's going to take to walk away as a winner?
I think you're right on all of that. It's going to come down to who can keep the who can win the kind of the turnover battle, and who can score in the red zone. Those two things. It's going to be a low scoring affair. I saw a couple projections that have it close to somewhere 24, 21, 28, something like that. I just expect something like that. I don't think either team, either of
Mhm.
these teams, are going to score over 30 points. I am interested to see, A&M's kind of struggle to start the game off fast. I'm interested to see, with the bye week, do they have some type of script or something to get that quarterback, whoever it is, if it's Haynes, if it's Connor, get him in there, get comfortable, put some points on the board on that first drive, and kind of see where things go. So that's what I'll be watching is just, can A&M start the game off fast? And then Devon Chain, he's had a pretty good year, but he was limited against Bama. A&M didn't really would have loved to have him, be used against Bama and kind of
Mhm.
let him do some stuff against Bama, but the holes weren't there. They were getting stuff through the air, so they kind of took what they got. So this could be a bit of a bounce back game for a chain. I'm not sure. It's my personal opinion. I don't think there's a faster running back in the country. And so that he's one of those guys that's kind of an angles eliminator. And with such little film on him from the last 2 weeks, obviously because of bye the Bama game, I'm interested to see how much they use him early on in this game.
Yeah, that's a good point, man. And dude is definitely fast, and Carolina's linebackers aren't the fastest linebackers in the SEC. So that may be kind of a game within the game thing to keep an eye on. And appreciate you bringing up that point about A&M not necessarily starting fast either. That's been a huge topic of discussion all year long at South Carolina as well, is that they have not started games fast up until the Kentucky game, where they really were able to create some momentum early and get going. And that was a huge part in them winning that game. So lots of very similar questions for both teams going into this game, it feels like. So we'll see what happens, man. For anybody out there who wants to read more about Texas A&M, going over to Aggie Scoop. That's the Texas A&M On 3 site. Tim, great insight, great info. We appreciate you, man, and enjoy the game on Saturday, okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Appreciate y'all. Thank you for having me.
Yep, anytime. That's Tim. Everybody go check them out. Aggie Scoop, again, On 3 site. And some really good insight there, Chris. We always like to, I guess, say what we learned after our guests roll on.
Mhm.
That was interesting info for me, in that I knew that these teams had some similarities, but the more Tim sort of shared with us, the more I was like, okay, I know these teams aren't identical, but there have been a lot of the same concerns on both sides, right down to the fact that it feels like we're going to have to work really hard to come up with some fresh keys to victory, because it's sort of playing out like what the keys to victory are for South Carolina every single week. And in this case, it's because both teams have had some similar successes and similar struggles as far as how they kind of are built this year and how
Mhm.
they've won games this year.
And, some of the areas that one team does maybe have an advantage in, the other also has, they're very strong in those areas too. Like there's the deficiencies and the strengths. I know Will Helms, who does a great job with statistical analysis for us, he pointed out on social media that South Carolina, which this is almost hard to believe given the talk early in the season, South Carolina's receivers have been excellent run blocking as of late. Um, Texas A&M's defenders, their secondary is excellent at stopping the run, which Tim pointed out, and the stats back that up. And I mentioned Antonio Johnson, their nickel. He's one of the best. I don't know if a lot of people have necessarily heard of him, but he's one of the best players, not only in the conference, but the country. He's really, really good stopping the run as well. I thought what he mentioned about red zone defense was also quite interesting. You brought up that point. A&M, they've given up a lot of yardage on the ground, but 3 rushing touchdowns. So why is that? Dug up a little bit more, West. Texas A&M, number 2 in the country in red zone defense. So now you start thinking, okay, South Carolina, you probably need to create some explosives. But you're right about the parallels with these teams. Offensively, they've shot themselves in the foot too often with turnovers, losing turnover margin. They both have been, they have talented quarterbacks, but have had some inconsistencies. They both have a really dynamic running back. So a lot of carryover between these two teams.
I feel like not every week, most weeks maybe, more often than not at least, we do sort of go into each game. And as the week goes on, Chris, I feel like we gather more and more information. We learn new things. and then we at least think we have an idea of how the game is going to potentially play out. When this week started, my sort of gap of what I think this game's going to be was a pretty wide gap. I felt going into the Kentucky game, like not even necessarily who was going to win it, but just how it was going to play out, that I had a pretty good grasp, that we all kind of had a pretty good grasp on that one. This one, I went into the week saying currently Carolina fans are riding the high of beating Kentucky a little too much for me to feel too confident at all in predicting a win over A&M because of what A&M has done to South Carolina the last few years. Not that South Carolina could not win the game. That's not what I'm saying. Just kind of the whole, if you played 10 times, who would win 7 times? Maybe A&M. But as the week is going on, the margin, as far as Vegas says, has shrunk a little bit. The margin in my head has shrunk a little bit as well, in that I really feel like both sides are going to be able to run the football. Both sides may give up some negative plays because we've seen Carolina do it on offense, and they have holes in their in their O-line. And really, it just doesn't feel like there's going to be a whole bunch of points, but it also simultaneously feels like A-Chain and Marshawn Lloyd could both have really big games and the opportunities. And it feels like you're going to see their DBs and Nick Emmanwori potentially tasked with making a lot of tackles to keep these backs from having 40-yard gains and keeping those at like 12-yard gains, basically.
Yeah, and that's the issue with A-Chain. You compare it to like Chris Rodriguez from Kentucky last week. South Carolina owned the line of scrimmage against Kentucky on their South Carolina's defensive line versus Kentucky's offensive line. We saw a lot of penetration, but Chris Rodriguez, because of his running style, was still often able to fall forward or drag some people for 7 to 9 yards or whatever it may be. He's able to avoid a lot of negative plays because of his style. So, and I wrote this earlier today, it sounds kind of silly, but I believe it. I could see, South Carolina having even more success against A-Chain because he's not a bigger back like that. If you get him bottled up in the backfield, you have a better chance of actually bringing him down than a Chris Rodriguez. Or he gets loose and now it's 75 yards instead of 30. So there's a little bit of a trade-off, and that's going to be a key question. I mean, watching back A&M against Alabama, it was pretty clear that Jimbo Fisher's game plan was, let's try to get A-Chain on the outside. Use some outside runs. Bama bottled it up for the most part. That's kind of been the story this year for A-Chain. South Carolina will have to do the same, or he can make you pay. And it's going to be that way on the other side of the ball with Marshawn Lloyd against this A&M defense.
Yeah, the other thing in the category of what did I learn, I was under the impression that these linebackers were still kind of a strength this year of this defense, but it sounds like, at least from what Tim said, as somebody who watches them every single week, that that's really not the case. It's much more in the secondary, and it seems like they, from what he said, they get a bunch of their defensive backs on the field because they have big guys that can run. So it's not necessarily, when he says a 3-2-6, most of the time you're thinking, well, that's definitely a formation, a personnel package that you can run the football on. And that's been the case to an extent, but in the case of their guys, like you talked about, their nickelback is a absolute stud. So you're just kind of in some ways getting your best guys on the field, it sounds like. And these are people that can tackle. It's not just putting a bunch of 5'10" corners out there and asking them to go tackle SEC backs. But the Marshawn Lloyd versus A-Chain battle, I don't really normally like to put like this guy versus this guy as like a key because they're not actually playing against each other. You know what I mean? Like Lloyd's playing the A&M defense. A-Chain's playing the South Carolina defense. They have no direct effect on each other at all. But whoever comes out on top in this game, whoever we look back on and say, oh, that guy took over this contest, that team is going to have a great chance to win the game. Although I think I just figured out what my prediction is going to be for my predictions that I have not sent in to you yet. Not my score prediction.
Okay.
Each week, everybody on Gamecock Central does a prediction on something that will happen in the game. Do you know what yours is going to be yet, Chris?
Nope, not a clue. Still thinking through that.
I think I just figured mine out.
Have you finalized? You don't have to say it, of course. We'll save that for tomorrow. But have you finalized your game prediction?
I have not. I have.
Me neither.
I'll be honest. I already sort of said it earlier in the week. I was leaning heavy to A&M, and reason why is exactly what I said earlier. Now, I will say this: Carolina has been absolutely dominated by A&M because of the lines of scrimmage. Now, this is not the same. It's a talented A&M defensive line. It's not the same group. So I think I have sort of eased up off that a little bit, but that's always been my feel is when Carolina has played your Georgias of the world, your Alabamas of the world, your A&M team the last couple of years, these truly elite defensive lines, they have no chance because those guys are just so big and quick that they create too many negative plays, basically. And I just don't know if this iteration of A&M falls in that category like the last two. And I do think Carolina has improved on the offensive line. Like for all people talk about the O-line with this group, I do think those guys are playing a good bit better so far this year than they have certainly last year.
Did South Carolina run the ball? And I'm kind of putting you on the spot, or we can just talk through this. Did they run the ball against a quality, like as in not average, like a good defense last season? You know, they did against Florida. Florida at that time was a mess. Auburn, not an elite defense, right?
And I think that game felt like they ran the ball well. Statistically, looking back, I think they just were hard-headed in the run. Like they just stuck with it, and they popped a few, if I'm remembering it correctly. But it wasn't a dominant rushing performance. Even saying Auburn isn't a great defense.
Yeah, I mean, one of their touchdowns was a pass to Zaquandre White. One was to Josh Van, really good ball from Jason Brown to Josh Van. So I don't. The point is, I don't really think so. Now, South Carolina, they've had their best when you factor in what the statistics were, what the eyeball test was, and who the opponent was. Like Kentucky would have been their best performance, right? Point is, even in the more limited spots against Arkansas, or even get myself in trouble for bringing this up, very limited spots against Georgia, you could see some things, and certainly against the lesser opponents, Charlotte and SC State, the run game has clicked more. So what I'm trying to get across is I think they're in better position to be able to run the football than they have been. Even the last, I mean, you made a great point earlier in the week, the 2020 team, 1,000-yard rusher, but that was feast or famine. You're breaking off big runs or you're getting stonewalled. And you're typically not doing it against really good defenses. You're doing it against an Ole Miss defense that was just awful. I mean, I couldn't come up with a creative word. They were bad. Vandy, teams like that, right? This offense looks like it has a better shot to run the ball, and that will be critical. You know, the best formula for South Carolina, regardless of opponent, we've seen it the past few weeks. It's been run the ball, let Spencer Rattler make some plays when he needs to, but don't mortgage your entire offense on let's go out and chuck the ball around. And brought this stat out earlier, Wes. In the first half, because what was South Carolina down 31 or 34 nothing at the half last year? Started the game as poorly as you could. Longest run in the first half last year, 8 yards by Zeb Nolan on a scramble. Lot of 1 yard, no yard, a couple fours, scattered in there, just no room to run. And so that's going to be a huge storyline on Saturday.
Against SEC competition last year, Chris, South Carolina had one game where they had a 100-yard rusher.
Okay. That settles it. What game was that?
Florida.
Yeah.
I think give them credit on the Florida game.
You still give them credit. Yeah.
They did, for whatever the other reasons are, they did run the ball well against Florida, and they stuck to the run. The other games that they had a 100-yard rusher, the bowl game, of course, when they just smashed North Carolina, and then Eastern Illinois, of course. But otherwise, against SEC teams, I mean, even going to Missouri, and I think Missouri had actually an underrated defense, but their leading rusher was Z White with 99, so did not get over the threshold. Wait, no, that's a lie. Z White was 60. I was misreading it. Z White had 99 against Auburn. Vandy, leading rusher, Z White was 65. Tennessee, Kevin Harris was 61. Leading rusher against Troy. This should have been our trivia question earlier today when we were looking for a trivia question. Who was South Carolina's leading rusher against Troy last year? If anybody can get it without looking, then you
Josh
are.
Van.
Who'd you say?
Josh Van.
Yep.
Because he had like a reverse or something, right?
He had I think he had two big reverses.
Yeah.
In that game. 52 yards rushing. So, yeah, and we say all that to point out, yes, I think there have been some very real improvements in what we've seen from South Carolina's O-line, particularly in the running game. And here's the thing. If you look at, let's see, Happy said the A&M defense is better than Kentucky's. They would bring some heat on the Gamecocks. Are they better than Kentucky's defense? They're certainly – Kentucky is certainly better at stopping the run than A&M's defense. Now, again, if you look at it just from a statistical standpoint, A&M's defense has kept them in games. Like, this has not been a bad unit at all. They are just a weird unit. Like, it's weird to see a team that is second to last in the conference in run defense, and then it'd be a good defense. Like, that's not the way it's supposed to happen,
It is. If you want to do the common opponent thing, like, that's you get into dangerous territory. But I mean, Mississippi State scored 17 against Kentucky, 42 against A&M, and turnovers play into those games, etc. But Kentucky's got a pretty salty defense. I think A&M, like if you look at the talent, do they have more talent than Kentucky? Yeah. A&M probably has more defensive talent than most teams in the league. Like I bet, Wes, I'm not going to take the time to do this. I bet if you stacked up A&M's like star ranking metrics against Bama, they would be close or maybe even ahead in a lot of categories. You could probably do that with them in a bunch of teams. I mean, they have some guys. They have some guys to where in a couple years up front, they could be a wrecking crew. I mean, they have a bunch of freshmen and sophomores up front. You can just tell. I mean, they're still young, and that's probably, it's not a talent issue. The primary reason is just sometimes they're not always in position. Athletically, they're very impressive.
So they got some dudes, is what you're telling us.
They got some dudes for sure.
Yeah, and well, I think that just goes to show you, like you said, man, you can have all the talent in the world, but if you got a bunch of freshmen who are just trying to get settled in, especially near the football, like that whole thing of like the closer you are to the football, the harder it is to play early. You can mix in a guy or two, and if you have a couple of other veterans around them, I think you can get away with it. But when you've got young guys everywhere, I think that's very difficult to get by, because you're in this league, man. You're playing guys that are just as big as you are. You're used to playing in high school when everybody's 60 pounds smaller and definitely not near as strong as you. So it matters. Mark is in the chat. Mark, you're getting off your script, man. You haven't yelled yet today. I need you to yell about he needs to yell about Satterfield and yell about playing Trey Kenyon, I think, are his his two go-tos. What else you got, Chris? Anything else to recap from Tim or something that was interesting to you? He really, if y'all are joining us late,
Yeah,
run it back, listen to Tim from Aggie Scoop. He packed a lot of information per sentence into those
he did.
20 minutes or so that we had.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple other things real briefly. Haynes King probably going to play. I mean, that's what Fisher says. But I thought it was interesting. He said that things looked kind of trending in the direction of Connor Weigman playing. Now, will that be if Haynes King struggles? Is that regardless? We don't know. But Jimbo did leave that door open. Maybe that's just kind of how he talks in his press conferences. But he did say that. Tim kind of reiterated it. And also, we don't really know what the situation is on the offensive line. They're banged up going into the Bama game. He mentioned their center, Bryce Foster, who had already missed some time this year. I saw the injury that Tim was referencing in the Bama game. He went down late with what looked like a knee injury. And so those can always be pretty serious. So looks like A&M probably going to be at least somewhat shorthanded on the offensive line, which can make for an interesting day. South Carolina's D-line, of course, coming off of their best performance of the year against Kentucky.
Yeah, I think I wonder if Tonka gets the start this week. I feel like he had certainly one of his better games of his career. I was laughing while you were talking. Mark is yelling again, so he's back on brand. Shout out, Mark. Also, shout out to our good friends at Liberty Tax, another great sponsor of GC Live, 803-462-5576. If you're frustrated by keeping up with your own bank statements or your QuickBook, they have a QuickBooks Pro advisor on staff. They can handle your bookkeeping and your payroll services. You can just do what you do best. That's making money, making your business successful. You can let Liberty Tax handle the rest. They got a bunch of locations right here in the Columbia area. 1123 South Lake Drive in Lexington, 7467 St. Andrews Road in Irmo, and then 551 St. Andrews Road in Columbia. Again, 803-462-5576. Shout out to Larry for being a sponsor and a supporter for quite some time now of a GC Live. Appreciate you, Larry, and appreciate Liberty Tax. We got one more day of shows. Again, reminder, tomorrow, 5 o'clock, Still Hands. We'll be going live from there. Come on out if you live in the area or you're already going to be in town for the game. Come on by Still Hands. It is sort of just an opportunity to go ahead and have a little pre-party. We'll be out there. They're having an oyster roast. They're going to have live music. They're going to have a giveaway, which we'll tell you about tomorrow as well. It's going to be like a package of gifts and things. So come on out. That's in Casey, South Carolina, if you're not familiar with it. But hopefully you are, because hopefully y'all came to the kickoff parties the last 2 years. Anyway, Chris, anything else, man?
That's it, man. Looking forward to tomorrow. Lots more content to do, another show to do. So stay tuned. We'll have all of that for the people.
He's Chris. I'm Wes. We appreciate y'all. Everybody who listens, watches, y'all are awesome. Everybody in the chat, appreciate y'all keeping it going. Even the user R, who I believe yesterday spammed us with every positive A&M thing in the book. Now he has turned face and spammed us with a bunch of South Carolina stuff. So
I was wondering that.
Come on back tomorrow. Tell us about, I don't know, Florida State, somebody else. We appreciate all the comments, positive or negative. Y'all coming out, Still Hands, hang out. We'll be there at 5 o'clock. Have a drink, have some oysters. It'll be fun. Until then, y'all have a good one.